Good evening. My name is Adrian Bennett, and I'm a member of the Department of History here, and I'd like to welcome you. I did. I'll start that over again. Can you hear me now? No? How's that? Better? More? How's that? Any better? My name is Adrian Bennett. Okay? I'd like to welcome you this evening on behalf of the Iowa State University Committee on Lectures. The lecture this evening, I'm sure, will be very intriguing. Before introducing this evening's speaker, let me remind you that on Thursday, in this room at 8 o'clock, Sam Jaffe, a UPI correspondent, will be speaking and the topic will be China and America, where do we go from here? Next week, there will be another lecture on China, this time by Roland Berger, an Englishman who's a trade consultant, or has been a trade consultant for the UN, and is at present time touring the United States, speaking on a variety of topics. And he will be speaking here on Thursday, February 13th in 15 Curtis, and his topic will be the new people of the new society in China. That lecture will be brought to you by, will be co-sponsored by the Department of History and the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association of Ames. This evening, we have a unique opportunity to hear one of the few Americans who has lived in China since its origin 25 years ago. He brings with him a keen grasp of the struggles China has undergone, not only in the last 25 years, but during the last century as well. Moreover, he has made significant contributions to the creation of the new China. Graduating from Northwestern University in 1939, and then from OCS, Officers Candidate School, in 1943, our speaker found himself in 1945 as a vice director of the Armed Forces Radio Service in China and head of a 14-station radio network in Shanghai. In 1946, Madame Sun Yat-sen invited him to become executive secretary or executive director of her relief and welfare organization, what is now known as the China Welfare Institute. In 1947, he founded the first children's theater in China, which became a prototype of many other such theaters in China. He also established mass literacy programs and welfare institutions throughout China. In 1951, after the founding of the People's Republic of China, he was appointed an advisor to the Children's Welfare Institute. In this role, he reorganized the institute to establish model and experimental projects in welfare and cultural activities for mothers and children. For example, between 1951 and 1971, he founded one of Shanghai's largest maternity and child care hospitals, the main Children's Palace in Shanghai, and a children's magazine of international circulation. He also helped to create the international magazine China Reconstructs, which has been around for a number of years and looks like this, and there's some on the back table there. In addition, he lectured on American literature to one of the largest universities in Shanghai and to the foreign language press institutes in both Shanghai and Peking. He has acted in Chinese motion pictures, advised and translated for film studios in China, and written innumerable articles on Chinese developments, especially in the cultural realm. During the same time, he married a Chinese actress, Chen Yuanqi, who is now working with the People's Republic of China's delegation in the UN. No?
No, just with the UN Secretariat.
Oh, I'm sorry. With the UN Secretariat, not with the delegation itself.
That's right.
Thank you. Since that's, you had to correct that on your vita then. That's the way it reads, but anyway. Yeah. Since leaving China, he has lectured widely in this country, from Yale to Berkeley, from Beloit, Wisconsin to Yellow Springs, Ohio, including Iowa State University, where in the fall of 1973, he gave a seminar for the Technology and Social Change program. At present, he is writing a book on his Chinese experience and is a visiting lecturer at New York University, the University of Maryland, and Johns Hopkins University, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with Eastern geography is one hell of a commute. In addition, he is an editor for 2 new publications on China, New China, a publication of the U.S.-China Friendship Association, which looks like this, and there's copies back there on the back table also. And he is also an editor for The Modern China, which is a more academic journal published in California. The first editions of both of these journals are now out. While the subject tonight is the current political struggle in China, his understanding of China is much broader than that, and he will, I am sure, be willing to answer questions on a variety of subjects, from religion to foreign policy, at the end of his lecture. I am very pleased to present to you Gerald Tannenbaum.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I understand that as far as the New China magazine is concerned, you also have subscription blanks in the back. Is that correct? Okay, anybody would like to take out a subscription, you can do it right here. Only $4 a year, very cheap. Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about the meaning of the criticism of Lin Biao and Confucius. Some people are a little confused by that over here. They want to know why they're criticizing 2 men that are dead. One for 2,000 years and another one for, well, since 1971. And they're trying to figure out what relevance does this have for today, in today's China. Well, I think it's obvious there must have been some kind of threat there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making so much noise about it. In other words, they feel that there was a threat to the socialist system in China, therefore they have to stand up and defend it. But in order to stand up and defend it, they have to understand what they're criticizing. So this is the basis for this movement to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius. I think first there are 2 myths about Confucius that I would like to dispel if I can. Many people here, when I go talking around the country, they insist that Confucianism is a religion. And when my wife hears this, she finds it very strange because, first of all, she never read Confucius. And secondly, she never thought of it as a religion. There's no structured religious setup for something like Confucius. She always interpreted it as part of Chinese philosophical history and nothing more than that. It's true, it's permeated Chinese life for 2,000 years, and but it's never something that people worshipped. So this is one thing that I think we should make clear. Another myth that people have here is that Confucius has always been revered in China, that he's revered as the sage of China. And that also is not exactly true. There's a long historical record of Confucius putting forth his ideas, but almost from the very moment that he started, there were also people who reacted very violently against him. Of course, there's lots of material coming out in China today showing all the data that has been collected to demonstrate just this very point, that Confucius was counterattacked from the moment he started to talk his philosophy. Of course, Confucius lived at a time when China was going through a period of very violent change 2,200 years ago, when it was in the process of changing from slavery into feudal states. And the way they explain it now is that Confucius, many people think that Confucius represented feudalistic philosophy, but what they're showing now is that he was trying to defend the system of slavery in China. And that there was another school of thought which they called the legalist school of thought, which was opposing that and which was trying to establish the feudal states in China. This was the battle that they claim has been taking place through the centuries. And as a matter of fact, if you look through the history of peasant revolutions in China, you'll find that a lot of them were motivated by anti-Confucian feelings. Time after time, in the peasant uprisings, they would burn Confucian temples or destroy his works because they felt he represented the oppressing class in China. For example, in the 1860s, where you had the famous Taiping Tianguo, the heavenly peace, the revolution of the rebellion, peasant rebellion of heavenly peace. It was essentially a peasant rebellion which started in South China, but the whole basis of their philosophy was anti-Confucian in its content. And as a matter of fact, they did burn down not only Confucian temples in South China, but also as far as Shandong, where Confucius was born. They burned down tore his temple apart, and also burnt all his writings and so forth. In the more modern era, in May 1919, when you had the student uprisings in China, combined with, for the first time, with workers and peasant movement in China, once again, one of their slogan was get rid of the Confucius junk shop. In other words, get rid of the Confucian feelings. This is one of the slogans, one of the most important slogans they had. In other words, trying to break break the hold that this old philosophy had on people's minds. And also, for example, during the 1930s, when Chiang Kai-shek started his New Life movement, which many people characterize as a neo-fascist movement in China, the basis of it, as far as his own people was concerned, was a Confucian philosophical thought. And at that time, there were many intellectuals in China who stood up and opposed this, wrote articles against it, including my own chairman, Sun Qingling, Madam Sun Yat-sen, who wrote an article just castigating that whole New Life movement and its Confucian underpinnings. The reason that people had this very deep emotional feeling against Confucius, I think it's very interesting. As you go through history, you'll find that a lot of dynasties that were overthrown on the basis of anti-Confucianism later on would adopt these same tenets of Confucianism in order to support themselves. Because one of the things that Confucius said was, for example, let the ruler be a ruler and the subject a subject. Let the father be a father and a son a son. In other words, don't rock the boat. Let things stay exactly as they are. Once they would get entrenched in the power, they would say, well, this is immutable. It's ordained by some heavenly force or something or other. Don't touch it. And if you were made poor and suffering, that's the way it should be. That's your fate. This was the whole meaning of this thing. This went down all through Chinese history. Again and again, you can see, for example, a dynasty would start out as a peasant rebellion. The peasants would win, and then after they attained power, consolidated their power, in order to make this power firm, they would adopt this kind of philosophy. So it's no wonder that through the years there's been a great hatred for Confucian. Now, it's very interesting, too, that among the women of China, there's also a deep feeling of hatred against Confucius, because perhaps as many of you know, he always said the woman has to obey the husband, and then if the husband's not there, she has to obey the son. In other words, the woman as a woman had no rights, and she was only a piece of property, and consequently, women throughout the history of China have had this bitter feeling about Confucius. So it's nothing new. The idea of criticizing Confucius, of taking him to task for what he perpetrated on the Chinese people for thousands of years, there's nothing new there. Now, of course, I know people can quote back things about having magnanimity and being just and sincere and all this kind of business, but I think you have to analyze for whom Confucius meant those things. And I think it's rather obvious because, for example, Lu Xun, who was known as the Gorky of China, one of the most famous writers and thinkers in Chinese history, lived in, did his writing and his political activity in the 1920s and 30s. He died in 1936. He said that Confucius, the things that Confucius said, worked for the ruling class, but that he had nothing to offer as far as the people of China was concerned. This was his evaluation of Confucius. So it's not strange that there should be this criticism of him. Of course, another thing that Confucius said in words to this effect, that is that those who have the intellect, they should lead. And those who work with their hands are stupid and they should be led. Of course, this, aside from being contemptuous of people who work with their hands, you know, was exactly contrary to everything that's been going on in China for the past 150 years. When, through the effort of the Chinese people, the lowest of the low, the workers and the peasants, the people who were dirt before, whose lives meant nothing, these were the people who have taken matters into their own hands with the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and changed China completely around. Whereas before it was a sick and split and bleeding country, today you have a unified country, one with a vibrant, viable economy with people who are very proud of the fact that they can stand up in the world. Now, to say that these people are stupid and are meant to be led by those who happen to have a little bit of learning, a little bit of intellect, of course, just completely reverses this whole view of history. Because Mao, Chairman Mao, said that it's the people, and the people alone, who are the makers of history, who are the creators of all wealth and all knowledge. This is the way he interprets. So you can see that's taking the bottom and putting it on the top, whereas Confucius was trying to reverse this all along. In other words, Confucius represented retrogression, no matter how he was used, in his own time or after his time. And those who opposed him represented progress, represented an attempt to make progress. Because to go from slavery into feudalism, of course, was a step that was progressive for its time. And that's why they place such emphasis on the criticism of Confucius. And Chinese people are doing a lot of investigation, a lot of research on this very question to make clear this two-line struggle that went on through all these thousands of years of Chinese history. But what does this have to do with Lin Biao? After all, that seems rather far-fetched, doesn't it? Well, it seems that despite the fact that you had all this criticism, both past and present, of Confucius, that Lin Biao, who was formerly the #2 man who was going to be Chairman Mao's successor, had long nurtured a worship of Confucius. At least that's what we're told today. And we're also told that above Lin Biao's bed, he had done some calligraphy, and he had put the slogan, "Restrain oneself and preserve the rights." Now, restrain oneself meant that, of course, he's #2, he's going to be the #1, but apparently he was in a hurry, and he was telling himself to cool it down, and then restore the rights. The reference that this had was in connection with the Cultural Revolution. Now, incidentally, this movement of criticizing Lin Biao and Confucius, some foreign correspondents sitting in Hong Kong reading the tea leaves have said that it's the second Cultural Revolution and so forth. which really is a bunch of nonsense, because the first Cultural Revolution hasn't ended yet. So how can you have a second one? It's another stage of the Cultural Revolution. It's what in Chinese parlance they would call a zhengfeng, a rectification movement, because there are certain attitudes that grew up out of this whole business of Lin Biao that affected life in China on a wide scale. Therefore, it has to be rectified. So it's part of the Cultural Revolution, not another Cultural Revolution. And the methods, of course, are entirely different from the early stages of the Cultural Revolution. For example, Joseph Lilliveld in the New York Times was predicting that any moment you're going to have the hordes running through the streets again, and Red Guards and all this kind of stuff, none of which happened. It's on a much more studious basis, where people are sitting down to study and to analyze and to debate. It's on this level, and I'll explain some of this that they're trying to do. This is the nature of the movement. It's seeking to understand where China has been in its history, where it is now, where it's going to go in the future, and how to get there. These are the things they're trying to discuss and decide. And actually, what Lin Biao was saying when he said restore the rights was that he was really denying whatever success had been attained in the Cultural Revolution. This was his whole purpose for a lot of things that he did after 1966, 1967. And actually, when you analyze some of the things that he was trying to do, which we later found out that he was trying to do, it was not much different than what Liu Shaoqi, the former #2 man that had been already deposed, it was not actually much different from what he was trying to institute as far as China was concerned. For example, return to individualism rather than the collective spirit that they're trying to inculcate among the Chinese people. Return to use of material incentives to gain productivity, rather than relying on a general political awareness among everybody and involvement of everybody in what's going on in China. This was the conflicts that they were setting up. A reliance, for example, on foreign assistance or foreign trade, rather than relying on yourselves to overcome any difficulty that you have. These were the ideas that were in conflict with one another. And in other words, the way they look at it now in China, he, like Liu Shaoqi, was trying to abandon all the progress that had been made as a result of the Cultural Revolution. It was trying to abandon the road to socialism, the road to consolidating socialism, and a return to, as they, in their phrase, the restoration of capitalism. This is what Lin Biao was trying to do under the cover of very revolutionary, very ultra-left slogans. You see, the right, slogans from the right were already completely discredited. Liu Shaoqi's line was so exposed, had been so criticized by millions of people in China that there was no possibility of using those same slogans to carry out his program. But under the guise of it sounding extremely revolutionary, and nobody could be more revolutionary than Lin Biao and the people following him, they were actually carrying out this other line. As in Chinese parlance, I know it sounds very peculiar to you, but in Chinese parlance it was actually left in phraseology, but right in essence. That was what they were talking about. Lin Biao also was an elitist in every sense of the word. I remember in 1968, 69, or 67 even, it already started. There was an almost unbelievable deification of Chairman Mao. I mean, it was really hard to believe. For example, it was demanded of everybody, let alone from every time you got up to say something in a meeting, you had to wish Chairman Mao long life 3 times, and then you have to wish Lin Biao have everlasting good health. That was not so bad, you know. I mean, it gets a little boring after a while, but you know, Madrishi Wanso Wujiang, it goes on and on and on. But aside from that, for example, people were told every time you get out of bed in the morning, you face Chairman Mao's picture and tell him what you're going to do that day. And then you go out and do it. And then you come back in the evening and you look at Chairman Mao's picture and you report what you've done. Well, you know, this turned some people off, and they couldn't figure out where it's coming from. And I remember at that time there was a meeting of the Central Committee, and one of the leading, the main advisor to the committee carrying out the Cultural Revolution said, "This sounds like counter-revolution. It doesn't sound like revolution at all. It sounds like counter-revolution. You're trying to stuff things down people's throats so that they can't take it. Instead of respecting Chairman Mao, you're making them sick of it." This was the things that we heard, you know, but we couldn't quite figure out where is all this business coming from. And of course, in the meantime, Lin Biao is saying that Chairman Mao's a genius, and that since he's Chairman Mao's best pupil, the inference was that he must be a genius too. After all, he said it. And this started, as I say, around the summer of 1967. And this, mind you, this was after they had what they call their seizure of power, their January Revolution in China, when they changed many of the leaderships in the party and the government administration in the cities and provinces, in the enterprises, units, and so forth. There was a big changeover. This all happened after that. So in other words, people began to feel there was a rash of commandism now. Before, leading up to this point, there was a great deal of discussion. When any decision had to be made, it had to be thoroughly discussed on all levels. Everybody was getting a chance to put their 2 cents in. If you didn't like what was going on, you put up a Dazabao, that's a big character newspaper. You put it up in your unit, or if you didn't like that, you went out in the street and you put it up. So there was a great deal of ferment, a great deal of really democratic activity going on there. And suddenly, people began to feel that there was a rash of commandism, that as orders were coming from the top, and these orders were not to be questioned. And this was once again directly contrary to what Chairman Mao was saying to people. He was saying, don't be slavish. Investigate everything. Make up your own mind. Don't let people tell you what to think. This was his instruction. Now we're getting all these orders, these commands coming in which they're not to be questioned. So there was a feeling that something's wrong. Something's wrong. And people were questioning it, trying to figure out where it came from. I can remember in one unit, which I was familiar with, this kind of command came down to this unit from the city government, and some young people in there were absolutely furious because they could see that this particular decision was wrong for their unit, wrong for the Cultural Revolution, everything. And really, they just like went out on strike. They said, we're not going to do anything until we settle this question. They wanted to sit down and discuss it and debate it right there and then. Well, they were very courageous, and actually that's what happened as a result of their activity, that the whole people, everybody in that unit had to sit down and discuss what this order is, what it means, whether it's correct or incorrect. Eventually, the order had to be rescinded. Of course, that's just one example. That didn't happen in a lot of other places where people didn't have the courage to stand up and refute this kind of thing. But in any event, there was this feeling that all the gains of the Cultural Revolution were being washed away or being eroded away. And the people were very, very unhappy about it. And you've got the feeling that this was happening not just on the lowest level, for example, in units that I was attached to, or in the city, or maybe even the province, but that this was something that maybe went up even much higher. And you know, people began to question a lot of things, but didn't know quite how to handle it. Of course, now later on, it was all revealed that a lot of this came from Lin Biao personally and the people around him. Now, it also was revealed later that one of the people under him was a man named Chen Boda, who was the number 4 man in the hierarchy at that time, who was representing Lin's line in the cultural group that was carrying out the Cultural Revolution. And actually, through Chen Boda, who was doing the day-to-day work, they were trying to really reverse a lot of the policies of the Cultural Revolution. This was what was going on. But in 1970, August 1970, there was a meeting of the Central Committee, and it was at this meeting that Chenbo Da brought up the question of having a state chairman. That, you see, Liu Shaoqi had been deposed. No one had filled that office. Chairman Mao's idea was they didn't need that office. You had a head of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, which is like the parliament, and that could suffice as a chairman of the country. But Chenbo Da pushed very hard to make Lin Biao the chairman of the country. And when this was knocked back, Chenbo Da himself was exposed. He disappeared from the scene. He's probably somewhere in Peking studying Marxism, Leninism, or something like that. And they say in Chinese, 学习学习. And then, at this point, it became obvious to Lin Biao that really he was not going to succeed Mao at all, that he really didn't have a chance to succeed him at all. And, you know, he's an avid student of coup d'etat. I remember in 1966, he gave a speech just at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution. And a good half of the speech detailed the history of coup d'etat in Chinese history. And he seemed to have spent a lot of time, done a lot of research on this whole business of coup d'etat. And actually, as it's revealed now, I know this sounds a little James Bondish, but I think it's mostly true. He did try to carry out an assassination attempt of Chairman Mao, not once, but twice. And when this was exposed, he happened to be at a seaside resort about 120 kilometers northeast of Peking called Beidahe. He and his wife were up there. Away to the Soviet Union. In their haste to get there, they neglected to take along a navigator and enough fuel. So they didn't know where they were flying. They flew in the general direction of Ulaanbaatar in Outer Mongolia, and apparently overflew their mark. And this is one story. They overflew their mark, and then they couldn't find out where they were going. They ran out of fuel, and the plane crashed, and everybody was killed. That's one story. The other story is that when the pilot found out what they were trying to do, he refused to fly the plane, after which there was a gun battle in the plane, and then the whole thing crashed and everybody died. Now you can take your pick there. But the point is that Lin Biao is no longer around, that's for sure. As was recently stated in the Chinese newspaper, he's neither here physically nor politically. So you can take your pick there, but that's the story. I think there is an element of truth in the one about overflying their mark, but certainly they crashed, that's for sure. So I think when this happened, of course, you can imagine when the number 2 man tries to run away in such a manner, this caused quite a stir in China. And, you know, they don't want to just investigate the incident itself, why it happened, but like everything that Chairman Mao does, he always wants to get to the philosophical roots of the thing. And not just to find out who's involved in this plot and this. That's, of course, very important because they're dangerous. Those people are dangerous. They're trying to overthrow the whole thing. But also, why would a person like Lin Biao, who after all had some 40 years experience as a revolutionary would turn this way, turn so bad, and cause such a terrible loss to China, and loss of face in front of the whole world. How? Why would that happen? I think it was when they went through his effects and everything that they found this Confucian calligraphy, this saying about restrain yourself and restore the rights, and in his diary they found all kinds of notations about his great worship, his great love of Confucius, and what they were saying when they exposed all this to the Chinese people. You see, here's a man, Confucius, who's dead 2,200 years, yet he's still doing harm to the cause of the Chinese people. He's still giving us problems. And unless we understand who Confucius was, what his position in society was, what he was trying to say, then we won't be alert for this kind of thing happening again. And then here's a prime example of Lin Biao, who was an excellent student of Confucius, betraying his party, betraying his country, and causing this great mess. This is what they were saying to the Chinese people. This is the reason you have to sit down and understand this thing, so that you can understand really what's the correct road we're going on, what's the incorrect road, that we don't want to take that. This is what they were asking the Chinese people to do. So this was the lesson. This was the lesson that they were trying to get the Chinese people to absorb. And well, now you say that's very good, but it sounds very abstract. How do you relate that to everyday life? Well, like I say, there were a lot of policies that were being changed in daily life in China. A lot of policies being changed. And when you sit down, first you study these materials. You go back and you look at Confucius, and then you look what Lin Biao said. And then also you got to look at the work in your organization or work in society as a whole. And for example, one of the fruits of the Cultural Revolution was something called 3-in-1 leadership. 3-in-1 leadership meant that you had leadership composed of old cadres. These are people who had long revolutionary history, starting all the way back in the days of the Long March. This is one group of people. Then you also have what they call middle cadres. Middle cadres, middle administrators. These were people who began their revolutionary career in the 1930s, 1940s, when Chinese people were resisting Japanese aggression. This is the second group. Then the third group was a bunch of new young men and women who had just come out of the tumult, out of the upheaval of the Cultural Revolution, who had earned their way, so to speak, as part of the group who were leading the Cultural Revolution. To put these together in a new political mix, where you had older people with vast experience in revolution and war, military affairs, also in administration and construction of socialism and so forth. And along with them, you have young people. Maybe they lack the experience, but they have great energy, and they're willing to try all kinds of new things, to put them together so as they can support one another, learn from one another, help one another. This is what they call 3-in-1 leadership. And this is the thing that Mao was trying to institute from the very top all the way down to every unit. For example, in my organization, the China Welfare Institute, we had this kind of leadership. Some of the original people who had been leaders before, who were really old cadres, in addition to some of the younger people who had come up out of the Cultural Revolution. Just, for example, one boy was only 19 years old, and was now one of the leaders of this whole organization that had 1,200 workers in it of various kinds. This was the kind of political mix that they were trying to get. Now, one of the cardinal rules for this movement was, because a lot of the older cadres, under the influence of Liu Shaoqi and his political line, had made rather serious errors. They had gone in the wrong direction. Now, Mao's instruction was, once they recognize that they made a mistake, once they've made a self-criticism, and that the people among whom they work accept this self-criticism as honest and sincere and thorough, then they should be restored to positions of authority. I mean, just you don't give them the name, you really put them to work in positions of authority. This was his instruction. But in that period, which I mentioned, the 1967-68 period, this just seemed impossible to do. I can't tell you how many instances I can think of where it was obvious that these people may have made errors, but they didn't have serious questions. They should have been put back in the positions of power. But no matter how you tried to work this out, when it went up to the upper level, say the city level, it just couldn't be done. So there was a great resistance against this, especially against the older cadres. And of course, the reason was that Lin Biao and the people under him wanted their people in those positions of authority. They were setting up their system. They wanted to take over, and they wanted to make sure their people were in charge of things. Especially, of course, you can imagine this pertains especially to city level, provincial level, and so forth. This was their way of preventing Mao's line from being carried out. Well, this was one thing. Of course, with the fall of Chen Boda and Lin Biao, a lot of these people came back into positions of authority again because the obstacles had been removed. But then another, as often happens in these kind of mass political movements, you swing from one side to the other. Then they found a lot of the accusations for the reason, as the reason for not putting these people back in the power was falling on the heads of these young people. And they said they were the reason for it, and these people were kicking a lot of the young people off of what at that time they still call them the revolutionary committees of various enterprises. So this was in this movement against criticizing Lin Biao and Confucius. This all had to be carefully sorted out. Who was incorrect at what time, and now how to rectify the situation. 3-in-1 is still the principle, still must have old cadres, middle cadres, and young cadres in the leadership, because this is the new thing that was born out of the Cultural Revolution. It's a good thing, therefore we should preserve it and try to fight for it. So this was one fruit of this present movement to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius, the Piling Pikung, as they say in Chinese. Another instance, for example. The whole system of higher education had been revamped during the Cultural Revolution. A lot of things were brought into question. What students do you admit to universities? What kind of courses you're going to give? What kind of materials you're going to teach in the courses? All of these things were opened up for discussion during the Cultural Revolution. And a great deal of change was made. For example, there was more emphasis on enrolling children, boys and girls from the families of workers and peasants and young soldiers from the People's Liberation Army as students in the university. You must understand that there are not nearly enough university positions in China. It's still a treasure. It's still a very privileged thing to be able to go to university. So they want to make sure that they're putting this treasure in the hands of people that are reliable from their point of view. That is, people who are going to use this knowledge, this treasure, for the Chinese people, not for themselves. This is extremely important for them because they had experience with this thing. After 1949, there were attempts made to enroll students from worker-peasant background and so forth, and they did. I can remember in 1958, they enrolled great numbers of them, but somehow there was resistance inside the university against this kind of universities against this kind of thing. And as the time went on, you found more and more these people would disappear. They had one reason or another. Their cultural level was not high enough, or they couldn't grasp this, they couldn't grasp that. There was some reason to get rid of them. And what you found was a concentration of sons and daughters of higher officials or higher army officers, even the sons and daughters of the former bourgeoisie and so forth. These were the people in the universities. They kept a sprinkling of workers and peasants, like we say here, for token worker and peasant students. Well, the Cultural Revolution criticized this very severely and said that they must make a determined effort and make sure it doesn't slip back, to make sure that these kind of students get in the university and stay there. And whatever help they need to lift their cultural level, okay, that help should be forthcoming. And actually, this was the policy they began to carry out. I visited many universities in 1970, 1971, and this was the actual results. At that time, the universities weren't quite opened yet to the full capacity, but they were experimenting with these ways of recruiting students, also experimenting on how much practice, how much theory, the combination of theory and practice, which of course involves how you teach and what you teach and so forth. It was highly experimental. They made sure you understood that. But anyway, a lot of changes were being made, and a lot of interesting changes were being made. This was going on. Well, by 1971 or 72, apparently there was an eroding of this thing, and once again, you began to find the people slipping into the university, as they say in Chinese, through the back door, 脚后门, to go through the back door. And the reason was, you know, some guy in authority in some position of consequence says, well, my daughter's down there at the countryside, because all kids, after they finish what we call junior high school here, everybody goes either to a factory or to the countryside. Most of them go to the countryside, because after all, 80% of China's population lives in the countryside. That's 600 million people. And if China's going to move ahead, it's going to be because the Chinese peasants are a great motive force there. Well, in order to understand them, understand their aspirations and so forth, understand what their problems are, you're going to have to identify with the Chinese peasants. And the only way you're really going to identify with them is if you go down there and live with them and study with them and work shoulder to shoulder with them. Then you can begin to understand them. You can learn a lot from them. Also, educated youth going from the city to the countryside take a little bit of knowledge about chemistry and mechanics and so forth. And after all, China is beginning to mechanize now. And they're beginning to use fertilizer, build fertilizer plants and hydroelectric plants of all kinds of sizes. In other words, there's a great amount of work to do in the Chinese countryside that demands people with some knowledge. And the city youth can supply this. So this was very good, except, you know, it's tough. You go from the city and live in the Chinese countryside, it's not easy, it's tough. So there are always some faint-hearted kids who want to try to sneak back one way or another. There are also some faint-hearted parents, oh, my dear little Johnny in the countryside there, I can't stand it. I got to find some way to get him back here. And so they get him back through the back door. Now this must have become a rather common phenomena because you know, the story about this appeared in the People's Daily, which is the most important paper in China. If it appeared there, it's for some purpose. It's just not by chance that this story is printed in such a paper. The story was that one young kid who was in the university in Nanking had exposed the fact that he had been let in through the back door. His father was a high army officer in the Nanking garrison, and that he recognized that this was the wrong way to do it, and that he had remorse about it, and so he was demanding that he be sent back to his place in the countryside because he had not gone through the process to be admitted to a university, which is your good points and bad points must be discussed by the people among whom you live and work, and they must decide whether you're worthy of such an education. He had not gone through that. And so he felt that he was there surreptitiously, that he didn't want this, and so he was demanding to be sent back. And of course, he exposed his old man in the process. And then the old man had to write a self-criticism and so forth. Well, this was put in the People's Daily, which goes all over the country at one time. Everybody read about it. Must have been a common phenomenon. So this was one thing that they exposed in this movement to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius and try to turn it around, put it back on the track again to make things a little cleaner. This is another thing. Another instance, for example, was Chairman Mao has, for years and years now, always insisted that those people in positions of leadership should never lose contact with the people in the grassroots level. This is very important. If you do that, he says, you lose your eyes and ears. You don't know what's going on down there. You don't know what the situation is. And, pardon me. And he was saying that every year, people in positions of leadership should 下放. It means go down to the basic level either to the countryside or to the factory, or if you're an Army officer, you go and serve a certain amount of time in the ranks. And this, of course, has salutary effects on both sides. It helps those who go down and helps the people among whom you go down among. And this is very important. The reason why, one of the reasons, not the reason, but one of the reasons, for example, he picks Dajai, that little village up tucked into the corner of the Taihang Mountains in northwest China. The reason he picks that little village and says, in agriculture, you should learn from this little place here, which only has 380 people, 400 people in it, that the reason is because they place great emphasis on the leadership doing productive labor along with everybody else. And they carry it out very well. This is very important, and Mao says this is the only way that you can prevent the feeling of being one or two cuts above everybody else, being an elite, and maintain your relations, your links with the people on the grassroots level. And once again, you know, it's very easy. You make the rule, and then it's very easy to say, oh, I'm so busy, I'm sorry, I can't go this month, I'll go next month. But next month comes, you find something else, there's some other excuse. It's very easy to put this thing off. And this was happening. Once again, this was happening. It just shows you, you know, that you got to work consistently at this kind of thing of changing people's attitudes. It doesn't come overnight. The socialist system doesn't drop out of the sky. It's you build it. You build it step by step, and you build new attitudes step by step. So here's the rule. You say we should go down and labor among the people in the grassroots, but then the rule gets pushed under the rug somewhere. Well, once again, this movement to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius said, well, if you have something like Lin Biao happen that shows the creation of an elite, what's the root of this thing as far as, say, my unit is concerned? Well, I find when I examine things that the leadership of my unit didn't really go down to work for a long, long time. And so he doesn't know what we think. He doesn't know what we feel. And so you criticize it. And so a great deal of criticism was leveled at this, just at this point, making sure that people who were in positions of leadership didn't lose their links with the rank and file. There are a whole list of other things. I don't want to go through this whole thing. But for example, on the question of self-reliance, there was a big debate about self-reliance because, after all, this is a basic policy as far as Chinese development is concerned. But you did find that it's very easy. Once again, you know, we need something, well, let's just buy it. Rather than stimulating people to say, well, we have a problem here, how can we get together and overcome it? That's the more difficult way. But in the meantime, you're spending precious foreign exchange for these machines that if you spent a little effort, if you mobilized people, if you stimulated them politically, you could overcome this thing yourself. It was done before, why couldn't it be done again? Once again, everybody knows the policy, but it's easier to do the other thing, and very frequently people take the easier road. Well, once again, this thing was dragged out, and for example, the number 5 steel mill in Shanghai became, once again, the typical example, the Dianxing Lizi, as we say in Chinese. It became the typical example of this, where they had this tremendous big factory of making steel, but they wanted some new machinery, and so the easiest thing was the leadership said, let's go buy it. They agreed with it, they had the money appropriated and everything, and then this movement started. When this movement started, some workers put up this Dazabao I mentioned before, this big character poster, and said, are we going on the right road? Maybe not. We're going to order all this machinery from abroad. Can't we do it ourselves? And so they had to stop work and sit down and discuss this whole question. Can we do it or not? Let's do as much as we can. What we can't do, all right, let's order. Well, they found that they could do this. They could make this machinery. They had everything there. They made the steel. They had the machine and tool plant there to make it. They could make the machinery if they spent a lot of extra time and effort on it. Well, that's what they decided to do, and they saved China, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in U.S. dollars in this way. Well, this was considered a victory for this movement, the very fact that they exposed this. Once again, this whole story is put into the newspapers or the magazines, and everybody is asked to please study this. Does it apply to you or not? This is the kind of thing that this movement was stimulating. So I think I've given you enough examples of how this thing was operating. Then I think it started, it's supposed to have started back last January, and it's continuing until now. Recently, we've had news that they've had the second plenary session of the 10th Central Committee of the Communist Party in China, and also the Fourth National People's Congress has met. Of course, the Central Committee has met previously, but this was the first time in 10 years that the National People's Congress had met. So it's a big event in modern Chinese history. And a lot of interpretations have been placed on this thing by the newspapers, the media here. They seem to be singing a rather similar song, which I'll go into in a minute. But here's my version of what all of this means. It means that this movement to criticize Lin Biao and Confucius has come to a very important point, that you can say that there has been a big victory in this particular movement. In other words, what they've been able to make clear is the whole question of Lin Biao's betrayal. They've solved this situation, and that people have received another real big political lesson about how to maintain China on the correct road. On the correct road, that means to consolidating socialism. And another thing, too, which is very important, because as I mentioned 2 or 3 times now, people do study there. They study a great deal. And they're studying all the time how to apply their principles, which are Marxism-Leninism, how to apply those principles to the concrete situation inside China. And once again, through this movement, they've obtained a certain degree, a certain level of elevation in their understanding of what is really Marxism-Leninism as applied to China, and what is phony Marxism-Leninism, because this is a very important point. If you can't distinguish between the two things, how are you going to know who's right and who's wrong? Who's going on the right road, who's going on the wrong road? And as I say, they want to involve everybody in this kind of analysis, this kind of decision. So they want everybody to study, everybody to get this lesson. So it means to me the fact that they could hold this plenary session of the Central Committee, and that they can hold this National People's Congress, that they've been able to solve some of these very fundamental problems that the whole Lin Biao incident brought up, that they've been successful in solving this, at least to their satisfaction. Now, that doesn't mean that all the problems from now on are solved. That's impossible. This problem is solved. Next week there'll be some other kind of problem, because that's how life is. You solve one contradiction and you go right on to the next one, because there's a continuing situation. And but for this particular moment, they've been able to solve this question in a very satisfactory way, so that the Chinese people can now move on to the next step. So this is, I think, one very extremely important point, that really they've achieved a big victory as far as the Lin Biao incident was concerned. Another thing I think is that this whole, especially the National People's Congress, is really a big victory as far as Chairman Mao's political line is concerned. Now, I know you read the media. For example, Robert Elegant, whatever his name is, in the Los Angeles Times, which is not so elegant, he claims that Chairman Mao's power base has been destroyed. And who destroyed it? Zhou Enlai. Now, this strikes me rather funny. Here's Zhou Enlai, who since 1931, actually, has been carefully following Chairman Mao and being the great executive who carried out Chairman Mao's ideas and decisions and so forth. Now, suddenly, at this late date, he undermines Chairman Mao's power base, which is not very clear what he means by power base. That's one interpretation. Newsweek, for example, one recent Newsweek says that Mao was told that enough is enough. And who is he told this by? By the so-called moderates. This is their interpretation, moderates. Another Newsweek, about a week later, said that Chairman Mao was given a gold watch. And, told, take it easy, old boy, you've done well, and here's your gold watch, and thank you, and good night. once again, he's being told this by the so-called moderates. This is the word moderate. Time magazine also had the big banner headline. Did you see this week's Time magazine? It's a victory for Zhou Enlai and the moderates. And this same line is echoed by the New York Times. It seems to be somewhat of a chorus going on here. And I began to think about this. What are they talking about? This business of moderates versus radicals and this kind of thing. I don't think they're quite clear about really what the debate is in China, inside China. Actually, what they mean by moderates is, you see, Chairman Mao keeps insisting that in everything, you got to put politics in command. That you got to talk politics. That decides everything. That decides how you approach your job, how you approach your studies. Everything is decided. How you teach, even all of this is decided by what political stand, what political point of view you have. And of course, some people get shaken up by that idea. Now, the moderates mean those people who say, let's put technique in command rather than politics. These are the people who don't want to talk about politics. And this is what their interpretation, as I see it, of what's moderate and what's radical as far as China is concerned. But I think they miscalculate, because the historical experience of the Chinese people is that unless you put politics in command, you're not going to move forward. If they hadn't put politics in command, they'd still be back under Chiang Kai-shek. They'd still be having famines and people starving to death and dying of every known disease in the world by the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands every year. And they've had that experience. Also, they've seen since 1949, every time you put politics in command, even sometimes it causes debate and disruption and so forth, they're not afraid of that. You know, here people get a little uptight if things get a little disrupted. They think, well, the system, something's going wrong. There they look at it differently. Every now and then you need to shake things up a little bit, because you can get bureaucratic and get all kinds of encrusted ideas. You got to stretch your mind every now and then. It's not such a bad thing to have a little disruption. I can remember in the summer of 1967, I mean, if you looked around China, you thought, my God, it's falling apart. There's total chaos here. There was fighting in Wuhan, and there's fighting somewhere else in Sichuan. It looks like civil war, and this is going on. And in the middle of all this, Chairman Mao takes a tour through 6 provinces through south central China, and his conclusion is that things could never be better. Well, when he said things could never be better, we began to think, what is he talking about? You know, and then finally we got the idea. He said things couldn't be better because people all over China were discussing Cultural Revolution. What does it mean? What does it mean as far as I'm concerned? What does it mean as far as my unit is concerned? What does it mean as far as my country is concerned? Everybody was discussing it. You sit down at a dinner table and the grandparents